Hi, I would like to welcome Douglas Holt. Thank you for coming here and sharing your ideas at the University of Southern Denmark. Douglas Holt has been a lecturer at Harvard Business School and a head of marketing at Oxford, and is one of the leading experts in branding and cultural marketing. So it's a privilege to have him here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Maybe just to start off with, for some of the viewers who are less familiar with your work, could you briefly explain what your introduction of the social and culture perspective in marketing is about, and what does it bring to the table?
I'll try. Yeah, I mean, marketing that I grew up in, I was a MBA and marketeer trained at a subsidiary or spinoff of Procter & Gamble. So in sort of the classic tradition of marketing for the last 40 years or so that still dominates at a lot of big companies, which is dominated by a paradigm, a model of way of thinking about branding that has, I guess it's sort of roots in psychology mostly. And I call it mindshare marketing because it's the idea was popularized in the 80s in this book by Trout and Rees, is that marketing is about figuring out which concepts are most valued for a particular category. Toothpaste, there's clean teeth, brightness, fresh taste. There's some concepts, conceptual categories that are associated with the category, benefits, and you want to own those benefits. And so you do that by reminding the consumer over and over again, this is our toothpaste, it's Colgate, and we will make sure that you don't go to the dentist and you'll get the least cavities. And tell them enough, and it will sort of load itself in the consumer synapse, and you end up owning this kind of cognitive real estate where they associate your product with that benefit, and that's why they'll buy your toothpaste. So that was and is how marketing still works today in most big consumer marketing companies. That there's something to be said for that idea, for like low involvement goods, incremental differences. The stuff you see at the grocery store, reminding consumers of that. It probably has some value. The problem I had with that is that it missed, when we think of the brands that are really important in our lives and society, that are the most valuable, the most best for business and most interesting for consumers, the Nikes and the Apples and so forth. That's not how they work. This is very clear, reflecting on my background and selling bleach and cleaning products, and then thinking about these other brands, that there's something very different, that they are cultural symbols, they're meaningful to people, and how they get to be meaningful to big chunks of society is the question that we need to answer to have the right strategies to build them. So I started out by saying, there's the kind of strategies I grew up on and that dominate today. Just to give the audience an idea, if you go to a big company, the Unilever's, Coca-Cola's, Henkel, P&G, a strategy document is some shape, a house, a circle, something populated with different phrases. And the strategy is that we want to own this phrase: fun, confident. So there's sort of adjectives that the brand wants to own. And that's, again, nice, but it's not meaningful to consumers to say, Coke is happiness. So I set out on a quest to figure out how brands that become powerful cultural symbols, cultural icons, become so, and then build models to explain, to actually build these kind of brands. And so the model that I end up with is kind of a socio-cultural model. So I'm looking at why do symbols become powerful? Because they do work in society. They accomplish something for our identities, for the meanings that we collectively need in society. Why do we need particular meanings at particular historical junctures becomes kind of the key question. So it's a very historical, in traditional marketing, history doesn't exist. Brands are these sort of metaphysical concepts that are hanging out in our brains. It doesn't matter who we are, where we are, irrelevant. When you start thinking about cultural symbols and looking in media studies and anthropology and sociology, history, you understand that actually symbols become valuable because they're bringing meaning to society to address particular issues, problems, demands for identity. And so that's, I guess, the key difference in what I do, or what the models I developed, is putting brands back into society, looking at them at the macro level, not at the individual in the household, what you're doing with it, but let's look at the whole societal level and look at how changes in society are creating demand for culture. I treat brands no differently than I would think of a politician or a culture producer, social movement actor, and looking at how they create meaning that's in demand.
Well, this new perspective, it demands not only a different way of thinking about branding, but also a different approach towards researching. Like you were talking about, phenomena that was overlooked with the methods and kind of research that we had before. So can it be done? What are the main obstacles that you find in putting these ideas to practice?
Yeah, I can. A lot of the work that we've done academically is to build the research tools to do this kind of study. They aren't capabilities that you commonly find, but they're capabilities that exist in the disciplines in the university if you know where to go look for them. So, putting together the right tools are important. So when you go to companies today, you find typically companies still use big surveys a lot. And when they're after these kinds of questions, they usually do one of two things. They say, let's go find what's changing out in society. They do trends analysis. Unfortunately, what trends analysis becomes is just they have these companies that go and find fairly superficial changes and then sell them to all the companies as here are the 10 leading trends. Might have nothing to do with your category, very kind of simple, and that's historical changes, trends. So that doesn't work. And then you have the companies talking about anthropology and ethnography, but what that tends to mean, it gets sort of stripped down, and it's as long as you go and talk to consumers in their natural environment, go to hang out at a bar talking about beer, in their home talking about detergent, that's an anthropological approach. What's missing is the kind of macro cultural lens to look at the discourses in society that consumers are using and how things change over time. And so disciplines like cultural history become really important, sociology to understand these social changes and understand the tensions they're creating collectively in society become very important, technology studies, lots of kind of interpretive social sciences and humanities that we've, think aren't scientific and aren't business oriented actually turn out to be the most powerful tools to provide insight for this kind of work.
So in a way, it's a very contextualized approach, right? So a lot of people would then argue that maybe it works just in a very specific context. I mean, you started your research with studying iconic brands. So I guess the expected question then is this relevant for brands that are not iconic, that are not global, that are not big and spectacular, but they're small and mundane?
Yeah, I mean, we've found it's relevant, what context does, you're right. So it's brands and brand strategy in the kind of conventional model is a huge abstraction. And so it seems more useful because it can be applied everywhere and anywhere. The problem is by abstracting to this, these adjectives, it becomes meaningless to people. So you have a strategy that can be applied anywhere, everywhere for the next decade or, millennium, but it's not useful. So building in context is actually what makes strategy both meaningful to, what the brand stands for, meaningful to consumers, and also directs how you manage the brand. The other problem with these abstractions is you can make, if you're an ad agency and you say, here, I want our brand to be fun. There are maybe 1,000 expressions of fun, and probably 990 of them are wrong for the brand. But because you're just saying fun, okay, I can make a nice fun design or a fun ad, and try and win an award because you're not really telling me what you want to stand for. So when you start talking about what brands stand for in more specific terms, this brand has this ideology that's going to be meaningful for these people in this historic moment, that gives you much more focus and makes you much more interesting, provocative in how you engage consumers, engage the media. So that's what's good about it. What's challenging is, I think, is more figuring out what context matters, how to build that context. Not the generalizability is not a huge problem. It's not, the problem isn't that only iconic brands work. It's actually the smaller, more kind of homogeneous the target is, the easier it is to do this kind of work. If you're trying to be a mass market brand and appeal to a very heterogeneous demographic, it's harder to be a symbol that's meaningful to a larger group. If you're a small challenger brand, it's often easier because then you can use the discourse. You can sort of brand against the big, the Apple or the Nike or the Coca-Cola, and it's often easier that way. So those are actually easy questions. The harder one usually is when people say, well, most of the brands I study are within a particular national context. So what about if you want to be if you're a global brand or international? And that certainly makes it harder. But if you look at all the successful global brands that are, have cultural value, none of them have done so because they have taken sort of the least common denominator value or, concept and spread it around the world. When they do that, they actually don't do so well. What they do is they take a local cultural ideal and they go cross-cultural. They take, Coca-Cola represented a particular ideology, very American, post-World War II. People wanted, they sold it. Nike did the same thing. Jack Daniels did the same thing. There's brands from Europe that are selling in the US representing a particular kind of European sophistication. So it's always, selling or marketing some ideology that has value because it's indigenous in one society, one locale, and taking it somewhere else, not sort of averaging it across the world.
We turn the tables a little bit for a second. Yeah. I mean, you're trying to point out what the benefits of this new approach, or just this broad perspective, are. But what are its weaknesses? Where do you feel that this approach and this whole tradition of thinking has to improve most?
Well, you touched on one problem, which is the disciplinary bases of this approach are not common either to the type of training for people who go into business. They don't typically have that training as, say, undergraduates, and it's not built into professional business education. So, the right training is required. The weaknesses of the approach are, for what we talked about, it's very, it's kind of complicated and contextual and nuanced. And, I read a chapter in my most recent book, Cultural Strategy. I read a chapter called On the Brand Bureaucracy. And I think that probably captures the weakness pretty as clearly as I can, which is, companies, once they scale to a certain size, need simplicity and standardization. Rationalized management tools emerge for a reason, because if you have a complex company, you're in different markets, a lot of product lines, senior management trying to manage these things, you need something that I can understand quickly, I can move around to different marketplaces without having to rethink things. So there's a certain beauty, bureaucratic beauty, to this model where I can think of brands as these are the three adjectives, that's all I have to know about that brand, and if we go into Poland, give me those three adjectives and you can move on. So it's super simple, and this approach, cultural branding by nature is complex. It requires rethinking across different contexts, different markets over time. New opportunities are coming due to historical change in the category. We better start rethinking our whole brand again 5 years later. These aren't things that companies want to do or do naturally. So I think that's the weakness. That weakness is particularly, though, for big companies. So, sort of counter to your question earlier that, it's just for big iconic brands, where this approach has the most kind of punch and value, I think, are to entrepreneurs, SMEs that aren't schooled in the conventional mindshare approach. They don't need all the rationalized management tools. There's huge opportunities out there in the market that big companies can't take advantage of. We always think of these companies having so much, huge competitive advantage on resource, R&D, and ability to, distribution power and things like that. But when it comes to creating products with cultural value, they're really not very good because of this brand bureaucracy. So I think it's a particularly powerful tool for startups and smaller companies.
I mean, your current research and books deal with the question of innovation more than what you started with.
Yes.
And so are these small companies, is that where you find most cultural innovation? Can you explain what cultural innovation is? Because very often we don't think of innovation in connection.
Sure. Yeah, it's just I started really engaging how managers, big companies think about innovation, getting more involved in technology, Silicon Valley, and everybody's so excited about the Googles and Facebooks and so forth. So there's a parallel kind of dominant paradigm in innovation that sort of parallels mindshare, which we try and make things nice and simple and cute. So we call it the better mousetraps paradigm. And it's ubiquitous. It's, invent a more convenient, cheaper, more useful tool, app, and people will come to it. It's very much an engineering / economics kind of paradigm. And that, again, obviously, there's huge innovations, technological innovations that are better mousetraps. The problem that most of us face is that we don't, the Steve Jobs come around every, one out of every 1,000 or 10,000 businesses. What about everybody else? And so the argument we make is that there's lots of products and services that people think of as innovative, even though they don't have some great IP. There's not something that's disruptive, that's creating a new category on a functional level. They're doing something else that consumers really think of as leading in a different way. And so we call it cultural innovation, because what they're really doing is they're disrupting culture, they're leading culture within their categories. And so even though it's, Nike shoes were very incrementally different than other, Converse and Reeboks in the day, but because of how they branded, they came across as very innovative company that people wanted to be a part of, and they wanted to believe the shoes were innovative as a result. And so there's sort of this halo that comes from being a cultural innovator that comes down to the product. So a lot of the work that we do now is, where it's really changed from what we were doing 5 or 10 years ago, is looking as kind of the opportunity analysis part, where we're trying to get particularly good at spotting these new big structural opportunities created by demand for, the cultural opportunities that are created by demand for ideology in the market, which we think we can do a much better job using this model than the people who are saying, here are the new trends. So other than that, it's sort of the same idea, but it's just very much about, how do you build the next Nike or the next Whole Foods or so forth, rather than figuring out how to tweak an existing brand.
What I like a lot about your work is that it's not necessarily just devoted to business and commerce opportunity, but also to questions of social change and activism. So can you tell us a bit more about that? I mean, are these concepts and ideas also relevant for other?
Yeah, no, I think, that's the part that I'm most excited about. I come from marketing originally, and I went into academia for intellectual reasons, but also very interested in bigger, just selling bleach every day wasn't that fulfilling. And just really interested in social and political issues. And so a lot of the research and reading that I did when I was a doctoral student and a junior faculty, wherein literature is very far removed from business. They're often in social movements, politics, cultural politics. And so a lot of these ideas actually, germinated from and have been adapted from these areas, and they're actually much more applicable to social enterprise, social movements than they are to Coca-Cola and Budweiser. They work well for Coca-Cola and Budweiser because the norm for branding, for brand strategy is pretty marginal. But when you think about where we get and look for meaning in life, their issues certainly much greater, and kind of space is much more important than beer or toothpaste. So a lot of the work that I've been doing, work with a lot of social mission companies where these ideas are very applicable, and there's a number of cases in cultural strategy on social mission, social enterprise. But certainly for social movements, what I've found is that it's sort of the space where strategy is most needed. If you're vested in social change or want to work on social issues, and where these tools can be the most powerful. So I certainly encourage those who don't want to go work in business but are interested in better strategy for working on social issues. This is a useful toolkit.
So you surprised us with two great books, one in 2004 and then the next one I think it was 2012 or 2011?
When was it? 2010.
2010, okay. So it's not as recent as I thought.
Yeah, I should have at least two more up by now.
Yeah. So what's the next one? Is the next one due? Where are your ideas pointing at?
Originally it was going to be on social enterprise, and then I came to the conclusion that a lot, again, the real leverage of these ideas around social issues is more social movements. And I've been working and planning a book on applying these ideas to environmental movements. Increasingly, that's led me, in the US at least, environmental movements are very hard to work with because there are some fundamental political issues that need to be solved first. And so increasingly I find myself working on politics. So right now I'm fascinated with applying these ideas to political culture. And so it will either be a book on environmental movement or political culture or both.
Sounds good. Maybe just to wrap it up, it seems that we need to learn more and more about not just business but also culture, politics, society in general. So we are kind of expected to play these multiple roles and think about all of these different problems, even as a branding manager or as a professor in marketing. So it sounds fairly stressful, and you are one of the few people who was very successful in bridging these different worlds and going from being a professor to a consultant and joining these different worlds together. So what are your experiences with that? I mean, is it as...
Yeah, I don't think it's stressful. I think it's I think most people's experience is that it's mysterious sort of how it works, because it's a new discipline, a new craft that is usually not part of business. So when I teach, I would teach whole MBA courses on just this at Oxford and Harvard, and I'd say, for the first couple of weeks, everybody's kind of confused and it's anarchy. And then after a while, maybe, 20-30% of the students really get into it. So I think there's a particular aptitude and an interest that lends itself to, being good at this stuff. And it's not, somebody who's has an engineering background. I shouldn't say that's kind of a stereotype, but, has more of that kind of mechanistic approach to business, maybe really likes finance and accounting, probably, is not as good a fit with somebody who's more interested in the humanities, literature, history, and so forth, and will probably be more able to make the connection. But I think, for most people, once they get into it, it's liberating, it makes work a lot more exciting to say. To give you an example, so one of the cases in our book that was an actual consulting project is on a pregnancy test So, the managers who used to work on that pregnancy test for years and years, doing surveys on benefit studies for, do we want the pregnancy test to be one day faster, earlier in time, and in terms of its measure and stuff. It was a boring, fast-moving consumer goods kind of job. Same, it didn't matter whether it was that or a cleaning product. But once we took it, we said, look, this is a pregnancy test. It's about women, bodies, sexuality, babies. It's about life. And once you engage it in that way, all of a sudden, wow, this is really interesting. You really have interesting conversations with the consumers. You can think about the product totally differently. It opens it up and makes it, it makes it really exciting. And it's, and also you learn more. I mean, it's like, if you're inquisitive, it becomes an investigation to solve a puzzle. Like, what does this thing really mean in people's lives? Why is it different there than there? So I think, for people who have that approach to their work and studies and life, I think it's, it's an exciting thing to do.
So it's tough, but it's worthwhile.
Exactly.
Thank you for this
Sure.
conversation, and good luck with your future work.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.